Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Greg Morissette. I'm the Dean and Vice Provost at Cornell Tech. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this event today, especially the folks in CU Global across the globe. Governor Hochul will be talking to us about the future of New York, a topic that, of course, is front and center in Cornell University's activities every day, whether it's in the research labs, whether it's in the classroom, or the engagement and outreach that we do across the state. I'm eager to hear Governor Hochul talk about what she's planning and how we can support these efforts. Cornell faculty have helped New York in a number of ways. For example, the L train a couple of years ago, the new techniques for sequencing genomes in the pandemic, and of course, a roadmap to a greater renewable energy generation. So we're ready to do a lot more, Governor Hochul, and thank you for coming. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to Steve Israel, Director of the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at the new Cornell Jebby Brooks School of Public Policy. Steve, thank you so much for arranging this. We're very happy to have you here hosting this and so many other wonderful discussions. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, actually, here's what we're going to do. Greg, we're going to have you introduce the governor. I'm just a former member of Congress. I'm nobody. We have the governor of the state of New York here. Let's give her a big hand. And she deserves a proper introduction. I'm going to ask the dean to do that. Greg?
I'll be happy to. So first of all, apologies, but we have a very tight schedule. I know the governor is very busy and I wanted to get her remarks as soon as possible. Since taking office 6 months ago, Governor Hochul has unveiled an ambitious plan to invest in infrastructure across New York State, from statewide broadband and highway rebuilding to the largest deployment of wind energy outside of Europe, and a $4 billion clean water, clean air, and green jobs bond act. The governor has committed to modernize and decarbonize New York from the ground up. Thank you, Governor Hochul, so much for coming to Cornell to discuss your plans with us today. Cheers.
Okay. All right, thank you so much, Dean. We do have a very brisk program this morning. The governor has been called to another meeting, so we're going to try and move this along as quickly as possible, take as many questions as we can. The conversation is hosted by the Cornell Brooks School, Institute of Politics and Global Affairs. I want to thank Dean Colleen Barry for her leadership and support, also being co-sponsored by the Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations, led by Dean Alexander Colvin, and of course our friends and leaders at the Regional Plan Association, which, as many of you know, develops and promotes ideas to improve the economic health, environmental resiliency, and the quality of life across our region. I do want to acknowledge some very special guests and leaders in our community. We have two former lieutenant governors in the room today, Kathy Hochul and Dick Ravitch. The president and CEO of the Regional Plan Association, Tom Wright, is with us. Tom, thank you for your leadership. And President Biden's, get this, Governor, President Biden's nominee to serve as the United States Ambassador to Greece, George Tsounis, is with us. Ambassador designee, it's good to be with you. Governor has promised that if this program goes well, New York State will have an embassy to Greece. I'm applying for the job. Let me just introduce our panel of conversants, and then we'll get to the first question. Howard Milstein, we're so honored to have him with us. He, as many of you know, chaired the New York State Thruway Authority. He brings a lifetime of private sector knowledge and experience to large-scale development. He is America's leading voice on the practice of design build. He leads the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs congressional salons, where we convene members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to figure out where we can get consensus on infrastructure and related issues. He's the chairman and president of the New York Private Bank and Trust and its operating bank, Emigrant Bank, and he serves on the Cornell University Board of Trustees. He is beaming in from Florida. Mr. Milstein, thank you for joining us. So good to be with you. And another name well known to us, Jeanette Sadakon. She served as commissioner of New York City's Department of Transportation. She oversaw a budget of $2.8 billion. She's now at Bloomberg Associates, where she works with mayors around the world to redesign and reimagine their cities. She was the deputy administrator of the Federal Transit Administration, and she serves on the board of the Regional Plan Association. Jeanette, thank you so much for being with us. Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Looking at the New York State Department of Transportation's press release on it, largest investment in New York State infrastructure in nearly a century, passed under the leadership of President Biden with bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. $13.5 billion for highways and bridges in New York, $11.2 billion for public transportation, $685 million for airport improvements, $94 million in highway safety, billions more in competitive grants. That's a lot of money.
It sure is.
How will you prioritize it in your vision?
Well, before we get started, I do want to thank Cornell for the invitation. I visited Cornell, both campuses. I helped put some shovels in the ground and cut ribbons at Cornell Tech. What an extraordinary facility that is, attracting global talent at a time when we need it here in the city, but also up in Ithaca. I was there for many of the commemorative anniversaries and had a chance to tour. So I believe in Cornell, and I want to thank Cornell and all of its leaders for being part of our whole economy and driving a lot of important ideas that we have embraced. And to have you as my former colleague in Congress a decade ago, it's hard to believe it was that long. We were just chatting about what's more fun, to be a member of Congress or governor? That's a tough one. But it's great to see the former Lieutenant Governor Dick Ravitch, head of the MTA, who's been an extraordinary public servant, and Tom and all of our friends at the RPA, and the leadership that you have exuded to bring many ideas forward to us that we've embraced, and also Janette for your many years of service. And I'm going to be out there with the shovel in my hands, digging, covering up some of those potholes, as I know you love to do. I'll bring you with me. We do it, and of course, George Sunis and many others. So thank you for the invitation here, and also to all the students. This is a perfect time to be imagining your future here in the state of New York, because we have unprecedented opportunities to really show, with leadership in Washington that's delivering for us, how a state like New York can embrace this opportunity. Again, I don't think it's even once in a generational, it is once in every century, to be able to have the resources to do, and to what has been neglected for too long. And I can say that with considerable experience, because first of all, as a staffer for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, back when he was on the Public Works Committee, we talked about infrastructure. And believe it or not, there was a time in our government when there were not partisan disputes over something like infrastructure. Democrats and Republicans back in the 80s and 90s said, yes, it's important, let's do that. I never dreamed to become the political football that it became. So even the fact that that was approved by the Democrats, by the president, is quite an extraordinary accomplishment. So we are the beneficiaries and stewards of this infusion of money, and it does fit perfectly in with the priorities that we've had on the books, but also those that I've embraced as governor in the last 6 months, a little less than 6 months, as I see the infrastructure challenges that face us now. In light of what happened with this pandemic, it gives us part of an opportunity to rethink many facets of our economy: education, healthcare, the whole idea of telecommuting. And I really do want everybody back in their offices. Just want to say that we thrive more when everybody comes back in person, but we'll cut you slack a little bit longer. But also, what about infrastructure and how important it is for people to feel safe, to have efficient service that they want to take advantage of? And when they're making that decision, am I going to stay out bunkered down and work remotely, or am I going to come back to the city where I once worked? It's going to come down to whether people feel comfortable with reliable service that makes them feel good. And so I am excited about these opportunities, because we are prioritizing infrastructure, not just to seize on these opportunities to get it right and to embrace infrastructure as a concept, but also the millions of jobs and opportunities, not just the direct jobs, but the indirect supply chain opportunities to really jumpstart our economy after it was taken down by the pandemic. So I've seen the benefits of this infrastructure concept all over. Infrastructure to many people sounds like a dry idea. Like, infrastructure sounds a little bit boring, right? I mean, raise your hand. Nobody in this room. I've seen nobody in this room. Wrong audience to ask. But to me, it's all about connections. connecting people and places, people to their jobs, people to their families at the end of the day. And if we can do something that literally shaves a half hour off your commute every single day, that is a half hour more with your kids at the dinner table, or to exercise or walk the dog or whatever you want to do. So these are quality of life issues. And that's why I am so energized by the opportunity that we have before us to embrace not just the money, Steve, but the opportunity to have a real imprint on infrastructure that'll create a legacy for generations to come. And I have specifics. I have scores of projects and dollars and timetables in my head. And there's no one more impatient in this state than I am. So when people say, how long is this going to take? I say, it better be yesterday, because I am pushing my team, constant communication with the MTA, the Port Authority, the DOT, all the principals that are involved in this to say, let's get it done now. The people need to see results. They need to feel that change is in the air, that conflicts in the past that stymied progress, whether it's the Gateway Tunnel because of relationships with New Jersey or Amtrak that were not going well. I have reset countless relationships to the benefit of New York, and that is why we're going to seize this. So you asked me specific questions, but this is my overall concept of the opportunity we have right before us, and I'm real excited about it.
Fantastic. Howard Milstein.
Well, good morning, everyone, and particularly good morning, Governor Hochul. I certainly applaud your vision for infrastructure in New York State. As you know, I served as chairman of the New York State Thruway Authority, and during my tenure there, we learned a great deal about how to apply private sector best practices to large public works projects. Now that billions of dollars are about to be released under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, do you intend to incorporate private sector experience to enable the most effective dispersal of those funds? And are you planning to expand the use of design build more broadly to achieve additional cost savings and efficiency?
I'll take the second one first. I believe in design build. I believe it gets us more accomplished sooner, which is what I'm all about. And it also increases our efficiency, so we have more resources to do additional projects. So when we save money in one area, we can spend it in another. And that's why I support design build. Also, of course, there's opportunities for the private sector. That's how we're redoing LaGuardia and JFK. That is primarily driven by the private sector in concert with us. I mean, JFK, $10 billion of investment. This Terminal 1 is going to be spectacular. And it's only because we have the support of the private sector to get that done. So I see the great possibilities. I see the results. I was just at LaGuardia Terminal B. We're going to be doing Terminal C literally this spring. So I'm going to be very busy with scissors in hand. I have to tell my lieutenant governor, I'm going to continue cutting ribbons because this is the fun part. This is a statement of accomplishing a great deal. So Howard, yes, we have learned a lot from the past. We do best. We can do more. We can do it more efficiently when the state government is in partnership with the private sector as well.
Jeanette Sadakon.
Great, Governor. It's such a pleasure to be with you. And you kind of, for us, like the infrastructure is our arena. You know, so many of the projects that we'd like to see move along are finally getting some wind. And one of the most important, I think, for us down here, you've talked about the importance of reducing commute time to make it easier for people to get to where they need to go, to improve the quality of life. And one of your most recent proposals, the Interboro Express, you know, reusing a transit line, a new 14-mile rail line to connect Brooklyn and Queens, extraordinary. And of course, we have a huge influx of money through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is terrific. But as we know, projects in New York City can take a lot of time and cost a lot of money. And so somewhat similar to Howard's question, I wondered, are there specific things that you want to see done so that we can actually get over the hump and get projects done faster at less expense? Because I think that's a huge challenge for us, particularly when implementing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, you know, being able to show what we can get done and not have this be a punching bag 3 years from now where politicians can say, oh, we gave them all the money, but they weren't able to use it.
Use it. I guarantee we'll use it. But that's an excellent question because communities get a little jaded after a while. They hear about projects and everyone gets all excited and you make the announcements. And then a decade later, you're saying, and whatever happened to that project? I came out of 14 years in local government and I saw that the communities start getting, they don't have the trust in their leaders when they make the promises they can't keep. I am not that kind of leader. If I say something, it is going to get done. And I'll move heaven and earth to get it done. And that is why when I talked about, Gateway and Penn Station, my first conversations were with Amtrak. Say, I need your buy-in with this. This could be a signature legacy project. Amtrak, you were just given over $60 billion out of the infrastructure dollars from the federal government. I have a great place for you to spend it. And we're going to work through all the politics that have stymied projects like this in the past, as well as, and I'll get back to Interboro Expressway because I love that project. But also, you talk about Gateway. The plan was to do projects sequentially. Well, let's do Gateway, and maybe in another dozen years, we'll get back to Penn Station. No. We have New Yorkers who deserve to have magnificent stations. And Moynihan Station, as I mentioned, named after my former boss, since I'm so proud, I was just there the other day. That is spectacular, but we have more people, more New Yorkers who come through Penn Station. They deserve the best. And so we're doing both at the same time. And I've had those conversations and we're moving fast ahead on both of those. But the Interboro Expressway gives us a chance to do something that the RPA suggested a long time ago. Thank you. And those are the ideas that I really appreciate. But just to dust it off and say, this is an existing rail line. So all the issues you have about right-of-ways and disrupting neighborhoods, et cetera, that all happened in the past. So seize upon this, but also recognize the fact that demographics have changed. People have moved. There was a time when everybody who lived in Queens and Brooklyn, their jobs were in Manhattan. Of course, the transportation would take them to Manhattan. But what happens now when you work in Brooklyn and live in Queens or vice versa? You really have to go into Manhattan to come back out. So sometimes a little common sense goes a long way. And I'm actually known for that. So take a look at this and say there's 900,000 people who are going to benefit from us moving ahead. It will not be as complicated. It will involve all the communities. But of all the projects I've talked about, I have had more excitement over this project from elected officials, and I've met with every single one of them, including the incoming council members who say, make sure we're all at the announcements, we're at the groundbreaking, we're at the ribbon cutting. So I'm excited about this concept, and I want more projects like that to say, yes, we can get this done. And the money coming out of Washington, I will tell you, I'm as bold as I have to be. My first couple weeks on the job, I went right to Washington, met Mitch Landrieu, who had just been named the czar of infrastructure. I was the first governor who showed up in his office. And I said, if I'm the first, I want the most. So he also laid out for us what they're looking for. I mean, these are the buckets we want you to check. We want to make sure it's transportation equity, that we deal with the issue of transportation deserts or areas where communities have been bisected. Places like Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, the Cross Bronx Expressway, all these areas were mistakes of the past. And I'm going forth to go cover the entire state and to reunite communities that were divided because someone decided it was better to get people quickly out of the downtown areas, out to the suburbs, and didn't care a damn about what was happening in those neighborhoods that were divided. We're bringing them back together. So the way I can get more money is I have a lot of contacts in Washington, leveraging those. Just met with the president in the White House on a weekend about 2 weeks ago. Talked to him, talked to the transportation leaders, Secretary Buttigieg, but also the relationships we have with people like Senator Chuck Schumer. And I will tell you, never take for granted, wake up every day and thank Georgia. Okay, just figure that one out. But I thank God for Georgia for doing the right thing to give our own senator that position where he is the most influential person almost in America next to Joe Biden when it comes to deciding where the money goes. That influence combined with the resources and the fact that we have an aggressive plan, resetting relationships that have stopped projects. This can be our golden era, and projects like that will really start restoring people's faith. And I'm going to be fast tracking that one. I am all over that project.
That's great.
And we should acknowledge that Secretary Buttigieg's deputy is in New York or Polly Trachtenberg.
Right. That doesn't hurt either.
Doesn't hurt either. Doesn't hurt either. Let me just acknowledge, I see we're joined by Kathy Wild from the New York City Partnership. Kathy, thank you so much for being with us. Ray McGuire, who ran for mayor and continues to make a vital contribution to New York. Thank you for being with us. By the way, I will say, and we're going to move to some students who always have priority at our Institute events. They have some questions, but I want you to know this, shall we say, intestinal fortitude, this boldness, I saw for myself. I did not know Kathy Hochul in 2012, and she came into my office. I was chairing the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and there was an open seat in Buffalo, and she said, "Mr. Chairman, I'm going to run for that seat." And I looked at her and said, "Kathy, there has not been a Democrat elected to Congress in that seat since the Civil War. Don't waste your time." And she looked at me and she said, "I will be the first Democrat elected to this seat." And she was, and she was. So don't underestimate Governor Hochul. All right, we have two questions from some of our students. The first will be asked by Patrick Meller. Patrick?
Thank you so much, Governor, for being here. I'm Patrick Meller, junior from Doctors originally in the ILR school, and very thankfully part of Congressman Israel's IFPJ scholarship program, also a councilman of the Ithaca City Council. But my question for you is the biggest thing I'm trying to do is get younger people involved in local government. How can young people get involved in New York City building? How can we be part of the golden era?
Oh, great question. Well, Ithaca's already ahead of its time. Didn't you have, isn't your mayor was the youngest, Cervantes, yeah, he was the youngest mayor in America. And I tried to recruit him to my administration, but he got a better offer, which I still chat with him about that. But what I really do believe, as you see from his example and your example of literally running for office while you're students, really creates the next generation of individuals who are so embedded in their communities. This is not the young people I see who are going and getting an education. They, "Oh, I'm going to run for Congress someday." What you're doing is you're learning politics and government from the ground up, which is where I started. I started in local races as a high school student, college student, being involved, electing good people, but running for office at the very ground level where it's city council or town councils, where I started. You learn that issues like infrastructure and fixing potholes and curbs and sewer and water lines really are what matter to people. So as much as people want to talk about bigger policies elsewhere, the experience you're getting, and by your example, encouraging others to do the same and being involved in politics on the campus really helps me feel confident that there's young people like you who understand what I'm talking about. When I say infrastructure means connecting people and making sure that people have clean water coming out of their faucets for their babies when they give them their drink in the morning, and making sure that we never go back to a situation that I grew up in, on the shores of a Bethlehem steel plant in Lake Erie, where I watched pollution occurring before my eyes, water being contaminated, and yet we still swam in it. So my advice to you is keep doing what you're doing. And to let, I would go around to other communities and recruit young people. I would speak on other college campuses. I would let those student leaders see what you accomplished and what people like Savante accomplished, that just because you're young does not mean you don't have a lot to offer. In fact, we need your voices because you're the ones who are going to be entrusting with the future when we're all finished, and you'll be watching out for my grandkids, which aren't here yet, but someday, actually in May. So this is important to me to know there's people like you and others who will step up, but I'd love to talk to you more directly and perhaps getting involved with us more directly. And thank you.
Just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you're a current student at Cornell. Wow, great representation. Wonderful, wonderful. Claire Tepperman. Claire.
Hello. Hello, Governor Hochul. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to us today. My name is Claire Templeman. I'm a sophomore studying policy analysis and management in the Brooks School. I'm also an undergrad scholar here at the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs, and I'm a New York City native. So my question is related to climate change. As I'm sure you're aware, New York State has set a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 85% by 2050. So I wanted to ask, how close is New York State to reaching this goal right now? And what are your plans to make sure that New York State actually actually matches this goal? Thank you.
Excellent question. And this is why I get excited when I see young people talking about these issues, because we have an opportunity to really make a mark, not just on our state and our country, but really on the planet by the decisions we're making today. And that is why I've embraced this issue. As I said, I grew up in a toxic dump, down the road from Love Canal as well. If you really want to talk about where I grew up, it's amazing. I'm still alive when I think about the water I was drinking, the air I was breathing, and everybody in that area. So when we talk about so many concepts here, like infrastructure, we are building resiliency into our infrastructure. We are requiring buildings to adopt green policies, so they are controlling their output and how they're affecting the climate. We are looking at this from so many different ways that I wish we had a generation ago. And it's also about putting money on the table. What I'm going to need your help in doing is getting voters to adopt the largest bond, an environmental bond, which will be on the ballot next November. And it was $3 billion. And I was on the job one week, and Hurricane Ida smacked this city. And I said, we're going to need more money than this. Let's go $4 billion. But that has to be adopted by the voters. And that's going to give us the resource, the money to make the investment so we can achieve the goals that you're talking about. We're going to actually achieve those goals at an earlier timetable. I'm just not going to announce that yet, but we are ahead of schedule because we have taken opportunities that were always there, but nobody sees them in an aggressive way the way we have just in the last few months. For example, powering New York City, trying to get ourselves onto renewables, wean ourselves from the fossil fuels. An opportunity came before us in September during Climate Week. Which choice is better for New York City to power it? Hydropower coming down transmission lines from Canada, Hydro-Quebec, or to bring in wind and solar from the Catskills? And it was viewed as a choice. Said, it's not a choice. We'll do both. We can double the time or the impact by just making a bolder decision that people expected us to do. I'll be tomorrow out on the far eastern end of Long Island with the Secretary of the Interior announcing that New York State will have the largest offshore wind farm outside of Europe, as was mentioned before. $500 million I'm putting in my budget this year to accomplish these goals. So we're leaning hard into wind, into solar, and so many other areas, as well as building that resiliency. So I never, ever again, as a governor or anyone else, has to see what I saw when Hurricane Ida destroyed the lives of people trapped in their homes because climate change is having an effect on us as we speak. And I said, I had to prepare for the fact that there could be a 100-year hurricane every week at the rate we're going. So that's the sense of urgency I bring to this. And I'm so delighted when I see young people feeling the same way. This is the cause of your generation as well, just as it was for mine. And we're going to continue to do everything we can while we are given the responsibility of protecting our planet for future generations.
Governor, you have 15 minutes. We want to open it up to some questions and answers. I'm going to ask Howard and Jeanette to queue up final questions on their end. Let me just ask this. It occurs to me, we're talking about these very significant investments in infrastructure, excuse me, vitally needed. But I would imagine that you also have a sensitivity to rebuilding New York's reserves, to putting some money aside. So can you share your thoughts about how you make these investments, but protect long-term solvency?
Well, this is what we just accomplished in our budget that was literally announced a couple of weeks ago. And as you know, the cycle, we're in budget negotiations. The hearings are being held. I just sat down with our leaders informally. It's all about relationships, about respect. And so I feel confident that we'll be able to get the budget through, in short order, which is great. But what you do with the money that you have in hand, right now we're in this unique situation that because of the federal dollars that came in to help us get through the pandemic, thank you, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, and all the Democrats again, that we are allocated money to help offset the loss in revenues we had. Literally this time last year, we were looking at a $17 billion hole in our budget. Now we have a surplus, but what do you do with the surplus? You manage it in a smart way. You take care of the immediate needs of people, the people who are still hurting from the pandemic, the individuals, the small businesses, the industry sectors that are not back yet. We have to help them come back with this money. Help our healthcare system that was brought to its knees. I'm allocating $10 billion to help shore up what became a crisis situation when I had to bring in the National Guard to staff hospitals and nursing homes because we did not have enough healthcare workers. No one could have foreseen that, but this pandemic opened up these cracks in our society and in many of our systems, and now we have to repair those cracks. So I have a lot of things I have to spend the money on right now. But that being said, this money, the revenues the money we received from Washington, the high tax receipts we had, as well as Wall Street doing well, I can't count on any of those three beyond this year. So we are setting aside for the first time ever substantial reserves. When I became governor back in August, we had a 4% reserve set aside for a so-called rainy day. I will ensure the next couple of years will be up to 15%. Because when I was doing municipal budgets for 14 years in my local town, we were always required to have a 15% reserve. I was rather shocked that New York didn't. So I know that if this happens again, and I don't want to say this because we're making great progress, but if another variant hits us, and anything has to happen anywhere close to what we went to before, I can't count on the federal government to be able to help us again. I have to say that New Yorkers can take care of themselves. So when we talk about a rainy day fund, I'm calling it my blizzard fund. I'm from Buffalo. It's a blizzard. So we have to make sure that we're prepared to weather that storm. And I'm proud that our budget is socially responsible, but very fiscally prudent. And that's why we'll have the money to be able to handle what comes our way. But an important part of our job is to anticipate problems in the future, whether we're in these seats or not, years from now. I have to protect this state going forward.
Let's take one or two questions from the audience, and then we're going to go back to Howard and Jeanette. You're going to have the final question. Steve.
Good morning, Governor. I was wondering if the high-speed train has factored into the infrastructure plan.
Ask the question again, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good morning, Governor. I was wondering whether the high-speed train approach might be factored into the infrastructure, being from the eastern end of Long Island also. But in general, upstate, everywhere, it'd be wonderful if that came into being. I was wondering what the plans are.
I love high-speed rail. I want you to know that. I love it. When I travel other countries, it is appalling to me that we did not have this, as part of an opportunity we had back when Senator Moynihan was managing this, right, in the 80s. And this is what drives me nuts about infrastructure. In the 1980s, it was deemed too expensive to do that, to connect Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, Albany, down to the city and out to Long Island. There were plans to do this. Congresswoman Louise Slaughter, I think probably with her last breath, was saying high-speed rail. So it's been talked about, but every time it's been talked about, it was always viewed too expensive for that time. I literally raised this. We did some cost analysis. It is very expensive to do. Someone had done it back in the 80s. But I want you to know, Steve, it is something that I'm going to continue. And I asked a lot of questions. Okay, why is it so expensive? What's required? Is it the train themselves? The acquisition of trains? Is it the right of ways? Is it having to balance the commercial freight trains? So I've been digging into this again. So it is a thought that's on my mind. But I believe in high-speed rail. I absolutely do. I think it could be transformative for our entire economy, especially those parts of our economy that were thriving when the Erie Canal was the main route of transportation. But it's been a couple hundred years since then. So we have to start finding a way to bring it all together again.
Final question from the audience. And yes, sir.
Governor, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Recent graduate from Cornell, something that I'm really passionate about. Thank you. Thanks, Governor, for being here. I'm a recent graduate of Cornell, and something I'm really passionate about is voting rights and expanding voting rights. And I think it's been somewhat frustrating to see the issue stalled in Congress, and especially to see what happened to some of the ballot proposals last November. And I'd love to hear how you're working to continue to expand voting rights and voting access in New York, especially in light of the disappointing results from those ballot proposals.
This is something I've been championing my entire life. And it is enormously disappointing to see how Washington has an opportunity before them to espouse our shared values as Americans, that everyone should have full access to the ballot box. But since, no surprise, it's not happening, we need to make sure that we do everything we can in our state to enshrine those values. And I will be very involved in ballot initiatives. Sometimes issues, when you think that they're so simple and so commonsensical and that there'll be unified support behind them, that people don't get out there and take it to the streets and fight, they get hijacked by other forces, and then that's how you lose. I think I was new to the position, but I see now that there are opportunities that need to be resurrected and a much more aggressive approach toward defending these here in the state of New York. And I'm going to continue pushing every way I can. Now going to have places for young people to vote on college campuses. We made that happen. That's been talked about since my staff, and they're a little bit younger than me, but not a whole lot. They've been championing since they were involved in their student government. 3 or 4 of them told me that way back. So this is an idea whose time has come to make it easier for students to vote on their college campuses. I was involved with this at Syracuse University, but also the whole idea of absentee voting. I've never subscribed to the idea that you have to come up with an excuse. You know, I'm out of the state. I'm really sick. I mean, now we have the pandemic excuse, which is not an excuse, it's the reality. But why places like Oregon can have about, depending on the election, 95 to 98% voter participation because they literally send people the ballot, self-addressed stamped envelope, and they participate. That to me is the best form of democracy because you're not leaving it to the whims of whether or not people have 2 jobs. They can't find a babysitter to go out and vote. The weather's really bad. I don't have a ride. Subway's late. All these reasons why we make it so difficult on election day. And that's why I really have been a strong supporter of early voting. I mean, that has been transformative to allow people to have that flexibility. And I'll make sure that we have even more voting sites than we've had in the past because initially it was 1 per population, 1 for small counties. I used to represent those small upstate rural counties. It takes a while to get from end of one to the other. It should not be that big of a barrier to do something as American as casting your vote every election day. So I totally agree with you. That is a high priority.
Howard Milstein.
Governor,
Another question or a comment?
Yes, my comment is there are infrastructure monies being distributed across the country, totaling an amount that probably dwarfs the capacity to build infrastructure by 20 to 1, 30 to 1, something of that nature. So your motto, be first and get the most, is very important. We have to move quickly or we're going to have the same kind of problem we had with getting masks, where states were competing against each other and basically not getting good value. These prices went up astronomically, but more important even than the price is getting it done. There's a political problem of what happens if we can't get this stuff done in any reasonable amount of time because it's happening all over the country. Keep in mind, that's actually America today. We have the supply chain bottlenecks. We have millions of job openings that we don't have people to take the jobs. The unemployment rate is down to about 3-4%. So how are we going to get this done? And thinking that through means what do we have to do now to get ahead of it? Because when everybody gets around to putting out their RFPs, these companies won't even have enough time to respond to the RFPs, forget about building bridges. So this will require a strategy and urgent attention.
Howard, it has my urgent attention, number one. I am very aggressive when it comes to pursuing projects that I believe in. And that's why I did go to the White House and I've had many conversations with them. And we also were the first to hear directly from the White House what they're looking for when they decide which projects to fund. They have very specific buckets that must be filled. I took this information back. I said, start filling the buckets. We know what they're asking for. So we know what we have to do to position ourselves to be more successful. But it's also, again, the political leverage that we have. President Biden pays a lot of attention to our state. Again, Senator Schumer, a delegation that is very aggressive, and a lot of our members of Congress, our ranking members, they've risen up in seniority, which, as Steve knows, gives you a lot more clout in these projects. So on the political side, we're in a good place, more than other states. On the aggressive side, we're New Yorkers. Don't worry, we're very aggressive. It's in our DNA. But also it comes down to having projects that are ready to be funded. So we have the project, we don't have to go dream, oh, how would we possibly spend this money? We have it all mentally spent. We have projects that are waiting to just get the go ahead. Even like Gateway, we just got the FTA approval to take the next steps. Every project, I'm saying, okay, we've got committees and you're on one of our committees to review the AirTrain, right? AirTrain. I said, if we're going to deep six a project, I want to know the alternative, bring in the smartest people to come up with ideas. And that's due in April or May, right?
Yep.
Maybe March.
I hear you.
See what I
hear
do?
you.
And I do the same with Jan Oliver and Rick Cotton. It's okay. Tell me the plans. How are we going to get there? Because we are in a competition. No doubt about it. This money, we have money that's been allocated, but there's also money that we have to compete for. And I would put our money on New York winning that competition any day of the week.
I'm going to give Jeanette the final question, but before that, some quick housekeeping. First, let me again thank Dean Colleen Barry. She's the new dean of the Brooks School at Cornell University. The Institute of Politics and Global Affairs resides in the Brooks School, and we're very grateful for that partnership. Our friends at ILR, our friends at RPA. On March 3rd, for those of you who are interested, we have the amazing French intellectual Bernard-Henri Lévy, who's just written an extraordinary book called The Will to See about human rights atrocities that we have largely forgotten because we are so occupied by COVID and other issues. He'll be with us on March 3rd. You can just Google Cornell Institute of Politics to be able to register for that event. And with that, I'm going to turn to Janette for the final
Great.
2-minute, and that includes the answer, question and comment.
Okay. Great to have seen you. No. We know that infrastructure investment can create wonderful outcomes in terms of improving equity, the environment, quality of life. And you have a number of proposals to help on the housing front through legalizing accessory dwelling units, through multifamily housing around transit stations. And we know these are incredibly important issues around the nation, and particularly here in New York. So I wanted to hear from you why you think this is important and why now.
We always had a housing crisis downstate in particular. I mean, housing prices upstate, very different dynamic, but on Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, and certainly the 5 boroughs. It has been a crisis in the making for a long time. But what this pandemic showed us as prices started to soar and people could not even entertain the idea of living in the town that they grew up in, we decided to approach this with an all hands on deck, look at every possible option out there. I have put $25 billion on the table as part of my budget. That is the largest single proposed investment in housing in our state's history. What I want to do is accomplish number of things. One is to address the homelessness issue, because this is a humanitarian crisis that has unfolded before our eyes. We've had shelters, but with the pandemic, people are fearful to go into shelters. They're fear of being assaulted in a shelter. People are not getting the services they need. So we have people who've been living on the margins who need a safe place to live. We also have young people, and we're drawing more people than ever before to the city in particular. Our explosion in jobs and technology and green energy, it's incredible. And these are younger people coming here, but they can't even find market rate, much less affordable housing. So we need an investment in workforce housing as well, so people can have their dreams realized and not say, I want to work in the city, but now I have to live so far out, because then we're going to get people who are going to opt for the remote commuting, which is going to damage our recovery. So we can't let that happen. So we have to build our way through it, but also let's be creative. The accessory dwelling units, yes, we're having these conversations. I understand there's sensitivity. Let's find the right answer that people will be willing to embrace this idea, as well as transit-oriented development. If you've been out to places like Ronkonkoma, these are transformative. I mean, I was there from the very beginning. I was out there just a couple months ago to see that people's lives are transformed when they have a chance to live in a beautiful home, a new apartment, and then literally never need a vehicle because they can walk to their ride, they can get on the train, they come back at the end of the day, there's a little restaurant there. Maybe some of these communities have really nice little bookshops like Steve's bookshop. But it's all about creating that sense of place around transportation. I mean, why was this not thought of before? So we understand that people have different opinions. I get that. I was in local government for 14 years. I know that with my relationships, we can find a way to work through all of this and satisfy our desire to create more housing stock. We have to. It's a high priority of all of ours. Make it easier for people to live and work in the same communities if they so choose, and also address the crisis we have with homelessness. It happens with the large infusion of money. We're putting that on the table, and we're working with the legislature to decide exactly how that's spent. But it's something we have to do. The time has come, too much time has passed, and I want to lean hard into this.
She said that she knows how to get a lot done in the least amount of time. You accomplished that this morning. Thank you. The governor of the state of New York.
Thank you.
Kathy Hochul.
Thank you.